The locks were changed by 9 in the morning, and by noon Marcus Hale was sitting in a parked sedan in a grocery store lot with his daughter asleep against the window and his son asking him a question he could not answer. The question was where? Where were they going to sleep? He did not have a where. He had a duffel bag, a booster seat, $41, and a car that smelled like the apples he had bought yesterday because they were cheap and would not spoil. What he did not have, what no one in that lot could have guessed looking at the tired man behind the wheel, was any idea that a woman 3 doors down from the apartment he had just lost had already decided his children were not going to be hungry that week. He did not know her name yet. He would not learn it for a long time, and the small thing she had quietly set in motion was already moving toward him, faster than his despair. Stay with this one. Somewhere in your life there is a person whose kindness you never traced back to its source, and tonight you might want to go find out who they were. For now, hold on to that grocery lot, because Marcus would remember it for the rest of his life, and so will you. He was 36. He had been a maintenance lead at a warehouse for 11 till the warehouse closed in March, and the closing had not been dramatic. Only an email and a final check and a handshake from a manager who looked as lost as he felt. After that, the months had a way of folding into each other. Unemployment came slow and small. The rent on the 2-bedroom in the brick complex on Delmore Street was $970, and he had paid it for 6 years without a single late notice. And then he had paid it late twice, and then he could not pay it at all. His wife had been gone 2 years by then, not dead, just gone, off to a new life in a new state with a man who had a boat and a temper, and she sent a card on the children's birthdays and nothing else. So it was Marcus and the kids. Dre was 9, Tasha was 6. They were good children, the kind who shared without being told to, and that fact undid him more than anything, because good children deserved a roof, and he could not give them one. The eviction had not surprised him, but it had still landed like a slap. He had stood in the doorway of the only home his daughter remembered, while a man in a county jacket taped a notice to the frame, and he had kept his voice level because Dre was watching, and Dre watched everything. They had until the end of the month, and then the end of the month came, and a locksmith with a drill changed the world, while Marcus loaded a duffel bag into the trunk. The neighbors had mostly stayed inside. That was the thing about hard times. People looked away, not because they were cruel, but because hardship was contagious and everyone was guarding their own small fire. One door had not stayed shut, though. One door, 3 down from his, had opened a crack the morning of the eviction, and an older woman had stood there in a housecoat, watching him carry his children's lives to the car, and she had not said a word, and he had not noticed her at all. Her name was Renata. She was 68, a retired school cafeteria manager, and she had lived in Unit 4 for 19 years. She knew things about the building that no one knew she knew. She knew which radiators clanked, and which children were quiet, because they were hungry, and which men carried their shame in the set of their shoulders. She had watched Marcus for 2 years, ever since the wife left, and she had seen him walk those 2 kids to the school bus every single morning in a coat that was too thin, and she had seen him stand at that bus stop until the bus pulled away even on the coldest days, lifting one hand as it turned the corner. She had decided some time ago that Marcus was a good man having a bad run. What she had not told a single soul, what no one in that building would have believed, was that this careful old woman was not poor. She had been careful her whole life, and careful had compounded, and quiet women who clip coupons sometimes have more set aside than the loud men who pity them. None of that mattered to the story yet. What mattered was that she had watched him pack a car, and she had gone back inside, and she had sat at her kitchen table with a pen. That first night they slept in the lot behind the grocery store, because it was lit, and there was a bathroom inside that stayed open until 11. Marcus reclined the front seats as far as they would go and laid his jacket over Tasha and told Dre it was an adventure, a camping trip, and Dre, who was 9 and knew better, had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Okay, Dad, an adventure," because the boy had decided to help his father carry the lie that nearly broke him. He sat in the dark, with his children breathing slow beside him, and he counted his money again in his head, $41. And he made it stretch across the days in front of him, and it did not reach. Gas to get to the day labor pickup. Food. A shower somewhere. He did the arithmetic the way a drowning man counts strokes to a shore he cannot see. And he prayed, not in words exactly. Just a pressure behind his eyes, aimed up at the roof of a 10-year-old car. A please that had no object. Morning came grey. He bought a coffee and 2 breakfast sandwiches inside and split them, half each, and gave the children the bigger halves, and he told himself he would eat real food at La Dibasite. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, slid the bag across and said, "Have a good one." And he said, "You too," and the ordinary kindness of it almost finished him, because nobody in that store knew he had no door to walk back to. He drove to the lot off Industrial, where men gathered before dawn under a single sodium light, 30 of them maybe, stamping their feet in the cold, breath rising, and he stood in line with his work gloves folded in his back pocket and his name ready, and a foreman in a quilted vest walked the line with a clipboard and picked the younger men first, the ones who looked like they could lift all day, and then he picked the men he knew, and by 8 the truck was full and the foreman was gone, and Marcus had not been picked. He stood there a moment after the others drifted off, the way you stand at a bus stop after the bus is gone, and then he walked back to the car. He did not know where else to be. He pulled into the parking area outside the school, so the kids could at least walk in clean and on time, and he watched them go in through the double doors, Dre carrying both backpacks because Tasha's was too heavy for her. And he sat there after they disappeared with his hands on the wheel and his head down and the coffee going cold in the holder, and that was when he saw it. An envelope, tucked under the wiper blade on the driver's side, a plain white envelope, slightly damp at one corner from the morning. His first thought was a ticket. His second thought was a flyer. He almost left it. Then he reached out the window and pulled it free, and it was heavier than paper should be, and his hands began to shake before his mind had caught up to why. Inside was cash, folded 20s, crisp, counted, and a note in careful cursive on lined paper. The note did not say much. It said, "For the children, don't worry about who. Just keep going." There was no name, there was no address. There were $300, 15 20s, and Marcus sat in the school lot and held them and could not breathe right for a full minute. $300. To a man with 41, $300 was not money, it was air. It was a week of motel nights at the place on Route 9 that took cash and asked no questions. It was real food. It was gas and a cushion. And the first time in 2 months that the ground had stopped tilting under him. He looked around the lot, slow, at the other cars, at the windows of the houses across the street, at the empty sidewalk. Whoever had done this was already gone. He pressed the note flat against the steering wheel and read it again. And then he did something he had not done since the warehouse closed. He put his face in his hands and he wept quietly in a parked car in the grey morning, out of nothing but relief. He did not spend it foolishly. That was not in him. He drove to the motel on Route 9 and paid for 3 nights at $38 a night, and got a room with 2 beds and a working shower and a television bolted to the wall. And when the children came out of school, he told them the adventure had a hotel now, and Tasha cheered like he had bought her a palace. He bought groceries that did not need a kitchen, bread and lunch meat and fruit and milk, and he watched his children eat until they were full, actually full, and the watching was its own kind of meal. That night, lying in the dark of a motel room with both kids finally sleeping in a real bed, he thought about the note. Don't worry about who. He worried about who. Not with suspicion, but with a kind of ache. Someone had seen him. In a season where he had felt invisible, where he had become the man people looked away from, someone had looked straight at his children and decided they mattered. He fell asleep turning the question over, and he did not get an answer, and 3 doors away from an apartment he no longer had, an old woman lay awake too, satisfied and saying nothing. The next envelope came 9 days later. By then, Marcus had found half a week of work, hanging drywall for a contractor named Pell, who paid in cash at the end of each day, and the motel nights were stretching, and the children were back to laughing at small things. and the panic had loosened from a fist to a hand. He had moved the car to a different lot, a church lot off Fifth, that the pastor let people use, because the 3 motel nights had run out and they were sleeping in the car again on the nights between work, and he did not want to lean too long on one place. The second envelope was under the same wiper, the driver's side, plain white, slightly heavier. $200 this time, 10/20s, and a note in the same careful hand. It said, "You are doing right by them, I see it. Keep going." And Marcus stood in the church lot in the early dark and turned a full circle, scanning, because how? How had they found the car? He had moved it across town. The only people who knew where he parked were the pastor and his own children. Someone was watching him closely enough to follow. And the strange thing, the thing he could not explain to himself, was that it did not frighten him. It steadied him. Out there, in the grey of the worst year of his life, somebody was keeping track of him on purpose, and the keeping felt like a hand on the back. He started to look for her. He did not know it was a her, not yet, but he started to look the way you look for a face in a crowd you would not recognize if you saw it. He paid more attention at the school lot. He noticed the regular cars, the mothers in the pickup line, the crossing guard, the man who walked a small grey dog past the fence every morning at the same time. He watched, and he saw nothing, because Renata was careful, and careful women are not caught. She had taken the city bus to the church lot before dawn, in a dark coat, and she had set the envelope and walked 2 blocks to a different stop and ridden home, and she had told no one, not her sister in Atlanta who called on Sundays, not the women from her old church, not a single living soul. She did not do it for thanks. She had decided long ago that the cleanest kind of giving was the kind that left no debt, because a gift with a name attached becomes a chain, and she did not want to chain a drowning man, she wanted to lift him. So she watched from a careful distance, and she counted what she had, and she planned the next one. Here is the thing you should know, the thing Marcus did not. The thing that turns this from a story about a little money into a story about being seen. Renata was not just leaving cash. She was building toward something. Every envelope was a test she did not fully mean to run, and Marcus passed each one the same way, but not wasting it by feeding his children, by going back to the labour line at dawn, by lifting one hand as the school bus turned the corner. She watched a man who had every reason to break stay whole for the sake of 2 kids, and the watching settled something in her. An old grief she carried, and the more she watched, the more she understood that the envelopes were not for him only. They were for her too. We will get to why. For now, hold the picture of an old woman on a city bus before dawn with a white envelope in her coat pocket, and a tired man combing a parking lot for a face he will never find, and the 9 feet of distance between 2 people who needed each other and did not yet know it. A third envelope came, and a fourth. The amounts changed. Once it was 400, once it was only 60, and the note that Time said, "This is what I had this week. The next will be more." And that one, the small one, the honest one, undid Marcus more than the large ones had, because it meant his benefactor was not rich, or so he believed. It meant somebody was giving out of their own short supply, dividing their bread, and that knowledge changed the weight of every dollar. He stopped thinking of the envelopes as charity. He started thinking of them as a partnership with a stranger, a covenant. He began to leave a note of his own under his own wiper when he parked, folded, waited with a stone, addressed to no one. The first said, "Thank you. We are okay this week. Save it for yourself." The second said, "Dre made the honor roll. I thought you would want to know." He did not know if she read them. She read everyone. She sat at her kitchen table and read Dre made the honor roll, and she put her hand flat on the paper and she cried the way the old cry, without sound for a long time because of the boy, and because of another boy, 30 years gone, that she had never stopped carrying. That was the grief. Renata had a son once. His name was Andre, and the world had not left an envelope on his car. He had been 24, a good young man having a bad run, out of work and ashamed and proud. And he had not told his mother how bad it had gotten because he did not want to be a burden. And one cold February he had run out of road. It was an accident, a heater, in a car running too long. in a closed garage where he had been sleeping because he would not come home and admit he had nowhere else. They found him with job applications folded in his coat. Renata had spent 30 years asking the one question that has no answer. The question of what one person could have done, one envelope, one knock on the door, one phone call that said, "Come home, there is no shame here." She had not been able to save her own boy. She had decided, watching a thin man lift his hand at a bus stop, that she could maybe save somebody else's father. Dre had a name that was a breath away from her son's. She had noticed that the first morning she had taken it as instruction. Winter came on. The work with Pell dried up when the job finished, and Pell shook his hand on the last day and said he wished he had more, and he meant it. And that was that. Marcus found other work the way you find work when you have no margin. A day at a time, a phone call returned, a name passed along. A week unloading trucks at a distribution dock where the dock manager liked that he never sat down. 3 days at a car wash, drying cars in the cold until his hands cracked at the knuckles. Then a stretch of nights, cleaning a medical office building off the Highway Edie that paid $11 an hour and let him bring the kids to sit in the break room with their homework while he ran a buffer down long empty halls under humming lights. Dre would help him empty the small trash cans on the second floor. When his homework was done, the two of them moving room to room in the quiet, Tasha would fall asleep with her cheek on a math worksheet, and Marcus would carry her to the car at 2 a.m, wrapped in his coat. The car was getting cold at night. He spent some of the envelope money on a better sleeping setup. Foam pads from a discount store and good thick blankets and a windshield cover cut to fit, and he was proud of how he had stretched it, proud the way a man is proud of, a thing he should not have to be proud of, but the truth underneath was getting hard to hide. They were still living in a car going into December, and a car in December is a different animal than a car in October. The cold came up through the seats. The windows wept and froze. Tasha got a cough that started small and then settled in her chest and would not quit, a wet rattling cough that woke her in the dark. And Marcus would sit her up and rub her back and listen to it and feel his own helplessness like a stone in his throat. He took her to a clinic on a Saturday and paid $40 cash he could not spare, and the doctor, a kind, tired woman with reading glasses, pushed up into her hair, listened to the girl's chest and asked a few quiet questions and looked at the address Marcus had given, which was a church on 5th, and looked back at him, and she did not say anything cruel. She said it gently, that the cough would keep coming back, as long as the child was sleeping somewhere cold, that what this little girl needed more than the syrup she was about to prescribe was a warm place to be at night. And Marcus thanked her and took the prescription and had to walk out of that room and stand in the hallway for her before he could go back in, smiling because his daughter was watching, and Tasha watched everything now too. She had learned it from her brother. The envelope that week was the largest yet, $500, and the note said, "Get her somewhere warm, whatever it takes. I will help." And under the careful cursive, for the first time, 2 more words that changed everything, or would, once he understood them. 2 more words. The note was signed, finally, not with a full name, just a first name, the way you sign for someone you have decided to let all the way in. It was signed Renata. He read the name and he did not know it. It meant nothing to him, a stranger's name, and yet it was the first time the hand behind the envelopes had a sound he could say out loud. He said it in the cold car. Renata. He folded that note into his wallet behind the first one, behind For the Children. Don't worry about who, and he made a decision that night that he would find her. Not to repay her, he could not repay her, but to look her in the face one time and say her name back to her, and let her see that it had worked, that her bread had not been wasted, that the children were going to be okay. Finding her took him into the new year. He had one thread, the name Renata, and a second thread he had not thought to pull until a cold morning at the school lot, when the man with the small grey dog walked by the fence as he always did and nodded, and Marcus on an impulse rolled down the window and asked him, did he know anyone named Renata who lived around here? An older woman, maybe. And the man with the dog, who had walked that block for years, said sure, Renata Coles, over on Delmore in the brick complex. Unit 4, been there forever, nice lady, quiet. Delmore, the brick complex. The building Marcus had been evicted from in October. 3 doors from the apartment that had been his. She had been there the whole time. She had watched him pack the car. She had been 9 feet away across a hallway for 2 years, and she had followed him across the city on buses before dawn. And she lived in Unit 4, and he had lived in Unit 1, and they had passed each other 100 times without a word. The whole structure of the thing rearranged itself in his mind in the space of a breath, and he sat in the school lot with his heart going hard. Because the stranger was not a stranger. The stranger was a neighbour he had never once stopped to know. He did not go that day, he was not ready, and more than that, he wanted to come to her with something other than need in his hands. So he waited 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, the thing he had not dared hope for arrived the way good things sometimes arrive, sideways, unannounced. The night work at the medical building turned into a daytime offer. The facility's supervisor, a heavyset man named Gomez, who ran the building like a ship, had been watching Marcus longer than Marcus knew. He had seen the floors come up cleaner than they had in years. He had noticed the man who clocked in early every single shift and never once called out, and the 2 children doing homework in the break room who never made a sound and always pushed in their chairs. One afternoon, Gomez called him into the small office off the loading dock and slid a folder across the desk and said he had a full-time slot opening. Facilities, daytime hours, salary, health insurance for him and the kids. And he had pulled Marcus's record and found 11 clean years at a warehouse before the closing. And he said a man with a record like that cleaning floors at night was a man in the wrong job. And did he want it? Marcus sat in that plastic chair and looked at the folder and could not immediately answer. And Gomez, who was a decent man, pretended to look at his computer to give him a moment. The job came with enough that he could sign a lease. He found a small 2-bedroom across town through a listing taped in a laundromat window. Nothing grand, $800 a month, a galley kitchen and a strip of yard and radiators that worked but warm, with a door that locked from the inside because he chose to lock it, and not because a county man had drilled it. The landlord, an older fellow, took one look at the new pay stub and the 2 polite kids and shook his hand. He moved his children into it on a Saturday in late January, carrying the same duffel bag up a different set of stairs, and Tasha ran from room to room claiming hers. And her cough was already fading in the warm, and that night, for the first time since October, Marcus Hale slept lying flat in a bed in a home, and he wept again in the dark, the good kind, the kind that lets go, and then he slept like a man let down from a cross. Then he went to find Renata. He brought the children, dressed in their best, and he brought a small potted plant, because he did not know what else you bring to the person who saved your life. And he drove to Delmore Street and parked in the lot he had been evicted from and walked his kids up the path to Unit 4. And he stood at the door of the woman who had stood at her door and watched him leave, and he knocked. She opened it in a housecoat, 68 years old, smaller than he had pictured, with careful eyes that went first to him and then down to the boy and held there. Andre, on the name that was a breath from her son's, and her hand came up to her mouth, he said, "I'm Marcus, from Unit 1. I think you've been looking out for us." And Renata Coles, who had given away thousands of dollars on city buses before dawn, and never once been thanked to her fess, who had carried a dead son for 30 years and told no one, opened her mouth and could not speak, and the careful was all gone out of her. And she reached out and put her hand against the boy's cheek, as if to be sure he was warm, and she said the only thing she could find, which was his name, Andre, by accident her son's, and then caught herself and said it right, Dre, and the 2 of them, the old woman and the father, stood in that doorway and understood each other completely, without another word. She told him then, at her kitchen table with the children eating cookies she had somehow had ready, as if she had known. She told him about Andre, about the heater and the garage and the job applications folded in the coat. About 30 years of the unanswerable question. She told him she had watched him at the bus stop and seen her son in him, a good man 1 envelope short of going under, and she had decided that this time the envelope would come. She did not say it grandly. She said it plainly, the way she did everything. And Marcus, who had spent months imagining a wealthy patron, a foundation, a church fund, understood at last that there had been no foundation. There had been one old woman and her savings and her grief and her decision. She had not been giving out of short supply. Not really. She had more than he ever guessed. But she had wanted him to feel that the gift cost her, because a gift that costs is a gift that says you are worth the cost. And he saw, finally, why she had signed the small one. This is what I had this week. She had been teaching him that he was worth somebody's last $60. He had passed her tests by never once treating the children as anything but the whole point. He tried to give some of it back. He had the job now, the salary, the warm apartment, and he sat at her table and started to say that he would pay her back, monthly, however long it took. And she put her careful hand flat on the table the way she put it flat on his notes, and she stopped him. She did not want it back. A debt repaid was a circle closed, and she did not want a closed circle, she wanted an open one. She told him what she wanted instead, and it was the only price she would ever name. She wanted him to do the same for someone else, someday, when he was steady, when he had it to spare, to watch for the thin coat at the bus stop and leave the envelope and sign no name, and to teach Dre to watch for it too, so that the watching would outlive them both. That was the whole repayment. Pass the bread, keep the circle open. Marcus looked at this woman who had turned her worst grief into a quiet machine for saving strangers, and he said yes, and he meant it the way you mean the few promises that reorganize a life. They became family after that, in the way that has nothing to do with blood. Renata came to Dre's honor roll assembly in the spring and sat in the second row in a good blue dress, and clapped until her hands hurt when they called his name. And afterward she held his certificate at arm's length and read it twice, and told him his grandmother would have been proud. And Dre, who had never had a grandmother in his life, decided in that moment that he had one now, and never questioned it again. She taught Tasha to make the cornbread that Andre had loved. The cast-iron skillet she had owned for 40 years coming down off its hook. The two of them floured the kilbers in the warm apartment on Saturday afternoons. Renata's careful hands over the girl's small ones, showing her how much buttermilk, how hot the pan, and the cough was long gone by then, and the girl's laugh filled the place where for 19 years there had mostly been the television and the clanking radiator. Marcus fixed everything in Renata's apartment that 19 years of living alone had let slide. The radiator that clanked he bled and balanced until it ran quiet. The window in the back bedroom that had stuck shut for a decade he planed and waxed until it slid up with one hand. The porch light that had been burned out so long she had stopped noticing the dark he replaced with a new fixture and a bright bulb. And the first night it came on, she stood under it on her own porch and looked up at it like it was a small moon. He did all of it on Saturdays and would not take $1, and she let him, because she understood something most rescuers never learn. That a man needed to give back to the person who lifted him, or the lifting can curdle slowly into shame. And she would not let his rescue cost him his dignity. So she handed him the toolbox and made the coffee, and let him be a man who fixed things in his mother's house. They had that kind of care for each other, the kind that watches what the other one needs and quietly meets it before it ever has to be spoken aloud, and he kept the promise. 2 years on, steady now, a facilities manager with a raise and a savings account of his own, Marcus stood in a grocery store lot at dusk and watched a young woman buckle 2 small children into a car that had a sleeping bag in the back seat. And a look on her face he knew from the inside, the look of arithmetic that does not reach. He waited until she went inside. Then he crossed the lot, and he slid a plain white envelope under her wiper blade on the driver's side, cash folded inside, and a note in his own hand that said, "For the children. Don't worry about who. Just keep going." He did not sign it. He walked back to his car where Dre, 15 now and tall, sat watching. And the boy did not have to ask what his father had done, because he had been taught to watch for the thin coat, and he had seen her too. They drove home in a comfortable quiet, father and son. The circle open and running, the bread passed on. Renata lived to see it, mostly. She slowed in her last years, but stayed sharp, and she was there at the table the night Marcus told her he had left his first envelope. And she nodded the way you nod when a long arithmetic finally comes out even, and she said, "Good, that's how you keep it going." And she reached over and patted his hand. When she passed in her sleep in Unit 4, in the building where she had spent 19 years, quietly keeping track of who was hungry and who was cold, Marcus and the children were the family at the front of the small church. Because they were her family, she had chosen them off a bus stop sidewalk and made it so. He found, going through her careful papers, a shoebox at the back of a closet, and in it were his notes, every one he had ever folded, under his own wiper and weighted with a stone. "Thank you. We are okay this week." Dre made the honor roll. She had collected them. She had kept her son's name written in a stranger's hand, because a stranger's boy had carried it. Back to her, warm and alive, when her own could not. He kept the shoebox. He keeps it still. On the anniversary of the eviction every year, Marcus does one thing. He drives to the grocery store lot where it started, the lit one with the bathroom open until 11, and he parks for a few minutes in the same corner, where he once sat with $41 and a daughter coughing against the window and a son helping him carry a lie, and he sits there in a paid-off car with a full tank and a warm home waiting, and he thinks about a white envelope damp at one corner under a wiper blade, and the careful cursive that said, "Don't worry about who." He found out who. Her name was a thing he could say out loud at the end, and he said it. And then he reaches into the glove box and takes out a plain white envelope he has already filled, because he never makes that drive empty-handed anymore, and he goes looking, in the lit lot, in the grey dusk, for the thin coat and the arithmetic that does not reach. Have you ever traced a kindness back to its source and found something that broke you open? If you have, tell me about it, and then stay close, because there is another story like this one, about a debt nobody could see being paid in the dark, and it is waiting for you right now.